Jets fans, the 2025 draft class is here, and the question looms, will this group join the ranks of legendary Jets draft classes like 2000, 2006, and 2022? We're going to break it down today on Locked On Jets.
You are Locked On Jets, your daily New York Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome. This is the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It is Wednesday, May 7th, 2025, and I'm your host, John B. from GettingGreenNation.com. Thank you for making the show your first listener, first watch every day. A big shout out to you everydayers. This is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets with new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. On today's show, we have our weekly mailbag. Thanks so much to everybody who sent in questions. Let's begin. Our first question. John, do you think that this Jets draft class has the potential to be one of the greatest classes in franchise history? We all know the difference the 2022 class made with Garrett Wilson, Sauce Gardner, Breece Hall, and Jermaine Johnson making immediate impacts. What are the odds this class has the same impact right off the bat? So that's a good question. And I think it's always difficult to expect any individual draft class to be one of the best in franchise history. But if you think about like the recent Jets draft classes, and by recent, I mean like last 25 years or so, when we talk about the ones that are the most decorated, the ones people talk about as being like the best of the best, there are really three that come to mind. There's the 2000 draft class, the 2006 draft class, and the 2022 draft class, the class of 3 years ago. And those three classes all have something in common. The Jets had extra early picks in all three of those years. In 2000, they actually had 4 first-round picks, and they used those picks to draft John Abraham, defensive end, Sean Ellis, another defensive end, Chad Pennington, a quarterback, and Anthony Beck to tight end. And then they threw in Lavernius Coles in the third round at wide receiver. Phenomenal draft class. 2006, the Jets drafted DeBrickashaw Ferguson and Nick Mangold, both in the first round. And then 2022, Jets had 4 top 40 picks. They picked Sauce Gardner 4th overall, Garrett Wilson 10th. They started with the day with 2 second-round picks. They traded up for a 3rd first-round pick to get Jermaine Johnson. And then night 2, early in the second round, they drafted Breece Hall. So it's actually not a surprise that those are the 3 best Jets draft classes of the 21st century, because those were the Jets draft classes where they had extra early picks. Now, that just because you have extra early picks doesn't mean you're going to hit on them. There are plenty of teams that add extra picks and whiff on them. So it's a credit to the Jets in all 3 of those years that they were able to correctly utilize their picks, because there's no guarantee you're going to be able to do that. But when you have the extra draft capital, it makes it more likely you're going to get great impact. Compare that with a year like this one where the Jets didn't really have any extra early picks. So that means you're going to have to hit on later picks, and you're going to need guys who are immediate starters. I just think it's a lot to ask. Back in 2000, the Jets had 2 extra first round picks because they traded Keyshawn Johnson. And they had 1 extra first round pick because they let Bill Belichick go to New England. So they got that pick from New England and ended up drafting Sean Ellis with it. In 2006, they traded Abraham, and that's how they got their extra first round pick. And then 2022 trades for Jamal Adams and Sam Darnold got them those extra selections. So, look, I think Armand Membou is probably going to start, and you would hope that a top 10 pick is going to make a big impact right off the bat, and he's going to play an important position at right tackle. So I'm optimistic that Membou can produce right off the bat. Aside from that, I think Mason Taylor will get some starting experience. I think the really interesting guy for me on day 3 is Malachi Moore. I think we know Azareye'h Thomas, who was the 3rd round pick, probably not going to start unless there's an injury, because you have Sauce Gardner and Brandon Stevens as outside corners, and Thomas was more of a pick for later on. He was more of a guy you're going to try and develop for 2 years or so and then hope he slides into the starting lineup year 3. Malachi Moore, I think, is kind of the interesting guy. If I had to pick one guy who's a day 3 pick who could potentially be a day 1 starter, it probably would be Moore. And Moore is the kind of guy that could if you actually find a day 1 starter on the final day of the draft, then potentially, you could take your class to the next gear. But I don't know if there's going to be this level of star power of these other Jets drafts. It's just tough to do when you don't have early picks. Reason Jets drafted so much star power is they were picking frequently among the top prospects in each class. So I don't think it's fair to expect that, and I don't think it needs to be a class. I don't think the class needs to have that degree of impact necessarily for the Jets for us to look back on this as a successful draft class. Next question, also about the Jets draft class, John. What are you expecting from Mason Taylor to do in year one? I'm very excited about him. I think he could upgrade the tight end position. I would keep my expectations in check with Mason Taylor. He has potential. I mean, I think his movement skills are very impressive for a guy of his size. I think particularly his ability to change directions quickly, because bigger guys, usually it takes them a while to get going. The stop-start ability is not typically that great, but very fluid mover. I think, though, there's going to be a developmental curve with Mason Taylor. I don't think there are many teams where he'd step in and be tight end one right off the bat. I think that the fact he's going to be the first tight end on the roster is really a reflection of how thin the Jets are at the position. Because I think in an ideal world, he'd come into a team and be like the second or maybe even the third tight end and kind of use this as a year to get up to speed. I don't think he ran that diverse of a route tree at LSU. I think he's got to do some work as a blocker. I think he's got to become a little bit more consistent with his fundamentals as a blocker. I would hope he's going to be better than Jeremy Ruckert. So I would hope he will be the starting tight end. But I think that expectations, I don't know that expectations should be super high for Mason Taylor, at least right off the bat. Now, what I'll say is that this is obviously a year where the Jets are looking more for the long term than they are the immediate here and now. And that's been clearly the way they built the roster. It's usually what happens when you have a first-year head coach and a first-year GM. They're kind of looking to make their mark. They're obvious. I don't want to say wins and losses don't matter, because they do. It's the NFL. And Aaron Glenn's been very clear about that. And he's been clear that, we're not going to make excuses, which is a welcome change of pace from what we've had recently with the Jets. Jets are going to try and win games here, but there's clearly an eye towards the future. I think there's an acknowledgement that this year's team is not probably built to go very far. I do think they can beat expectations, but I don't think this year's team is, a Super Bowl contender or anything. So I think Mason Taylor I think it's going to start slowly for him. I would not be surprised if, he wasn't that impressive in the early part of the season, because again, he's kind of learning stuff, and in a better world, he'd be a world where the Jets had better tight end play. He'd be kind of starting off on a slower pace, but he may benefit from it in the long run because he'll get plenty of reps. There's an old saying, the best way to learn how to do something is to do it. And he's going to get plenty of game reps at game speed against NFL caliber talent. And even if he struggles early, it's a good opportunity to learn. And I think the hope is that he consistently improves as the season progresses. He just consistently gets better. And by the end of the year, maybe he'll be a quality option. The other thing working in Mason Taylor's favor is that it's not like this is a team where you have a lot of guys who are going to command a huge target share. Garrett Wilson's probably going to get the way the team is built right now, unless there's some surprise trade. Garrett Wilson's going to finish in the top 5 in the NFL in targets again, because there really aren't many other options. And Breece Hall is going to see a lot of targets too out of the backfield, because there's not a lot at the wide receiver position. This opens up an opportunity for maybe Mason Taylor to see more targets than you might expect a rookie tight end to get, particularly a second-round rookie tight end. So, I think we got to be a little bit cautious with our expectations from Mason Taylor. But I do think this is a situation. It's actually a pretty good situation for him to grow, because he's going to get an opportunity to learn on the field. And that may not produce big results in year one, but it actually could benefit him quite a bit year 2, 3, and further down the line. Because the reps you struggle with year one sometimes turn into really productive reps in future seasons. Now, here on the Locked On Jets podcast, let's talk about future seasons. Let's talk about players on the team. Are there any Jets we can expect to take a leap in 2025 with this new coaching staff? I have a few guys who could be in the mix, one on offense, one on defense. I'll tell you who they are as we continue here on the Wednesday edition of Locked On Jets. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by Skylight Calendar. Say goodbye to sticky notes, scribbled plans on the fridge, and overlapping calendar invites. The Skylight Calendar is here to bring clarity to the chaos and help families stay organized without the stress. This sleek digital display syncs with your existing calendars, Google, Apple, Outlook, and more, making it simple to track appointments, practices, dinners, and reminders all in one easy-to-see place. It'll mean so much to eliminate the I don't know excuse from your family's routine. Assigning everyone their own color will finally solve the who does what confusion in your house. Just think about it. How often do plans get missed because they're buried in a digital calendar or not written down at all? That's over now because of Skylight Calendar. And right now, Skylight is offering our listeners $30 off their 15-inch calendars by going to skylightcal.com/NFL. Go to skylightcal.com/NFL for $30 off your 15-inch calendar. That's skylightcal.com/NFL. Thank you so much for making Locked On Jets your first listen or first watch every day. And a big shout out to you everydayers. This is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets with new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday. Let's continue now with our weekly mailbag. Our next question, John, which Jets players do you see as most likely to break out in 2025? Yeah, a very good question. There are two guys who I kind of have my eye on. And it's odd to say this about the first guy. He's on the defensive side of the ball. And the reason it's odd to say is because he kind of broke out in 2024, and that's Will McDonald, who, of course, had a big jump between year one and year two. And the reason I'm saying that is I'm kind of interested in what this new coaching staff is going to do with McDonald, because this time a year ago, the Jets were making noise that they were going to have Will McDonald add bulk. And then he came into training camp, and he came in around the same weight he was as a rookie. And as a rookie, he was kind of skinny, very skinny for the defensive end position. In fact, one of the smallest defensive ends in the league. And I think that really limited what he could do as a run defender, because he was really exposed as a run defender last year. Good pass rusher, and double-digit sacks last year, and a pretty good pressure rate. But as a run defender, he was a liability. I don't know what went into the decision to not have him bulk up, because when the Jets drafted him, I felt like, he could add some muscle to his frame without really losing his explosiveness. There's some guys you don't want to add muscle because they just don't have the frame to add it. And sometimes you add muscle, like you lose athleticism. But McDonald, had some. I felt like the Jets could bulk McDonald up, and he'd still be just as fast and just as explosive. So I think for Will McDonald, the question is he going to be a guy who can only play on passing downs, or is he a guy who can play on some of the early downs? And can he hold up well enough in the run game to prevent to be on the field on early downs? That's an open question. I think it comes down to, can the Jets get him to bulk up a little bit? And look, I think if you're only a passing down specialist as a pass rusher in today's NFL, there's still plenty of value for that. I mean, you can play 50, 60% of the snaps if you're purely a pass rushing specialist. But it would be nice to see Will McDonald become a more complete player. But that comes down to, what the Jets decide to do with him, whether or not they ask him to put a little bulk on, get up to maybe 250 or so. I mean, I've always felt like he could handle that and still be just as effective as a pass rusher. But we'll see on that front. And on the offensive side of the ball, I'm going to go out on a limb here. But there's talent somewhere in Braelon Allen. I mean, this was a kid who, as a 17-year-old, averaged almost 7 yards per carry playing in the Big Ten, one of the best conferences in college football. And it's been odd to see how up and down his career has been. In Wisconsin, his best year was his freshman year. Sophomore year wasn't quite as good. Junior year wasn't quite as good as that. Then he comes to the Jets, and his rookie year kind of resembled his college career. We got off to a really big start, and then kind of regressed. That first month of the season, I heard a lot of Jets fans criticizing Breece Hall and praising Braelon Allen, and rightly so, because Allen was better than Breece Hall. And the point was made frequently that Braelon Allen was having more success, and he was playing in the same offense with the same offensive line blocking for him than Breece Hall. And then the first month ended, and after that, Breece Hall was really good, and Braelon Allen was not so good, and people just kind of forgot about that. But we've seen Allen flash. We saw it in college. We've seen it in the pros. And Aaron Glenn's made it clear that Braelon Allen's going to be a part of this offense. He's going to, the Jets view this as a kind of like a three-man timeshare in the backfield. At least that's what Aaron Glenn's saying right now. So there's going to be an opportunity for Braelon Allen to, up his game. And, Braelon Allen's got soft hands, so he can be a threat in the receiving game. So I don't know exactly why Braelon Allen fell off after the first 4 weeks or so, but there's talent with him. So I wouldn't be surprised if he, improved quite a bit this year. Our next question, John, we know the Jets changed coaches this year. Everybody's talking about this new coaching staff as an upgrade, but we don't know how good they're going to be. Doesn't everybody always say their new coaching staff is going to be good? How confident should we be that this coaching staff will be an upgrade? So that's a good question. And it is true that pretty much whenever any team fires its coaching staff, its fans claim that the new coaching staff is going to be an upgrade because how could it be worse than the old guys? And frequently that's not the case. You know, it wasn't when the Jets fired Todd Bowles, people said, well, anybody they hire is going to be an upgrade. They ended up hiring Adam Gase, which was a downgrade. So there are plenty of examples of teams that fire a coach that's not working and it's a downgrade. You can say the Jets did it last year with Robert Saleh. They fired Saleh. People said, well, how could it get worse? Well, we saw what Jeff Ulbrich did. But I will say that last year the coaching got so bad under Ulbrich, it's almost impossible it won't be some degree of upgrade. Like this has to be an upgrade, just from the standpoint that you're going to have a head coach focused on head coaching duties and a defensive coordinator focused on defensive coordinator duties. That alone is an upgrade. And we'll see how good Tanner Engstrand is, but it'd be tough to not be better than what the offensive coaching the Jets had last year, because the Jets really didn't have an offensive coordinator to start the year in Nathaniel Hackett. And then Todd Downing took over, and I think Downing was clearly an upgrade over Hackett. I mean, I think the offense was much better conceived with Downing in there, but Todd Downing himself is probably a bottom 5 coordinator in this league. The Jets would have been better last year if Downing had at least gotten a full training camp, though, if he had a chance to kind of plan out the season in advance. So essentially, you have dynamics here. It's not even so much about this coach is better than that coach. It's just you have. Unlike last year, where you had spent most of the season with a head coach who was trying to be the defensive coordinator at the same time, and an offensive coordinator who really didn't have the chance to really plan out how he wanted the offense to work. Just eliminating those dynamics, you know, Glenn and Engstrand don't have to be the greatest coaches in the world for this to be an upgrade. Now, how much of an upgrade will it be? We hope it's a big upgrade. We hope Glenn is really good. We hope Engstrand is really good. If they are, this Jets team could surprise people. But just the fact that we will have people who are able to like do their job, do their full job, that's an upgrade. And it's obvious, like the Jets are probably going to get better coaching this year, just from the standpoint you'll have guys who are able to plan out, like focused completely on their own task, which was not the case a year ago. Because last year you had an offensive coordinator who inherited the job on the fly, and a head coach who was trying to do both his job and the defensive coordinator's job. So just eliminating that, I mean, I think the Jets are going to be better coached this year. And the other thing with Ulbrich is he was bad. I don't think he would have been good, but if he had a full offseason to prepare, he at least would have had a chance to he would have had a couple months to think through, all right, how am I going to deal with game management? How am I going to deal with this and that? He never really had a chance to think through how he wanted to be a head coach. And that really showed. You know, it was a very impulsive move. We've talked a lot about this. It was obviously a very impulsive move for the Jets to fire Robert Saleh when they did. And, you know, you saw the drawbacks to it because you didn't have coaches who really had a chance to like plan out in advance how they were going to execute their job. So I think it'd be tough for things to not be better. I would be shocked if things weren't better. And I'm usually the first to warn you that, you know, just changing things doesn't necessarily guarantee an improvement. But in this case, just changing the approach, giving your coaches a chance to plan out a full offseason will probably almost certainly bring improvement. Now, here on the Locked On Jets podcast, we're going to talk kickers. We keep talking kickers, but there are questions. Who's going to win the job? It's kind of a 3-way battle for the Jets right now between the incumbents, an injury replacement, and a rookie. How confident should Jets fans be in their kicking game? I'm actually pretty confident, and you may disagree, but I think I'm right. I'll explain why as we continue here on this Wednesday mailbag edition of Locked On Jets. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by FanDuel. The NBA playoffs are in full swing, and every night delivers highlight-worthy performances, major momentum shifts, and can't-miss moments. Whether it's a game-winning shot or a breakout player, there's never been a better time to get in on the action, and FanDuel makes it easy to stay in the game before tip-off and live. With player props, performance trends, and same-game parlays, fans have way more ways than ever to play smart and win big. The NBA playoffs, an exciting time, especially if you're in this city, New York Knicks, trying to make a run to the NBA Finals, off to a good start in their second round series against the Boston Celtics. Well, maybe you're not a Knicks fan. Maybe your team's playing somewhere else, or maybe your team's not even in the playoffs. No matter what, FanDuel's the best place to get in on the action. Are you new to FanDuel? Well, it's the perfect time to sign up. Head to FanDuel.com and place your first $5 bet. If it wins, you'll get $200 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. Again, it's FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the National Basketball Association. This is the Locked On Jets podcast. On this Wednesday, we're doing our weekly mailbag show. Our next question comes from Christoph in Germany, who writes, am I the only one annoyed by the Shedeur Sanders discussion in the last few weeks? So maybe we can switch the subject to a guy with at least some relevance. Greg Zuerlein in the kicking situation. I expect him to be cut post-June 1st. Or will the Jets surprise us like they did with Lazard? Is the inconsistent some years ago badly injured Andrews Carlson or the undrafted free agent Caden Davis the answer? I was expecting the Jets to spend a late round pick there. So Christoph is unhappy with the discussion around Shedeur Sanders. I don't think he's mad at me because I've only talked about Shedeur Sanders once since the draft ended. And I felt like that was a topic that deserved to be discussed once. This quarterback who many people were projecting to go in the first round fell to round 5. But I don't think, I think now that we've discussed him, there's not really much point of talking about Shedeur Sanders till the Jets play the Browns this year. I'm not that worried about the kicker spot. This is amazing. This is the third straight day we're talking about Greg Zuerlein. Would have thought we'd spend so much time talking about the kicker situation, but of course it was an issue for the Jets last year. The thing about like kickers is they're very inconsistent year to year. And this actually brings me to a bigger point with the way people break down the NFL. It amazes me like how people get the impression during the offseason that things will never change in this league. And you see this manifest itself in many different ways. Like so many times, like this time of year, I'll say, well, I think this team's going to win the NFC North this coming season. And the response I'll get is, well, they didn't win it last year. And well, I wasn't saying they won it last year. I was saying they may win it this year. We see so much change from year to year in the NFL. We see bad teams become good. We see good teams become bad. We see players we're expected to be good be not so good, and vice versa. There's a lot that changes from year to year. And one of the things that changes pretty frequently is kicker performance. That can be good one year and bad the next year. A year ago, the Jets re-signed Greg Zuerlein. He was a free agent. They gave him a contract. Everybody loved that contract at the time. I said, we finally got a good kicker in here. We're glad we kept him. And now it's like everyone's acting like Greg Zuerlein's hopeless. I don't really understand there was some conspiracy theory last year when the Jets stuck him on IR that like he wasn't really injured, that the Jets were just trying to cover for his bad kicking. And I don't really know that I understand that. I don't really get the conspiracy theories that the Jets were trying to like invent an injury to excuse Greg Zuerlein's performance. I mean, what was that based on? Guys get injured. Sometimes guys try and kick through injuries, and kicking mechanics are like really, really intricate. And you throw one thing off, if you got an injury, you overcompensate, your body movements change, and it can just throw you off your game. But look, the Jets have 3 guys here. They have Zuerlein, who typically has been a good kicker through his career. They have Andrews Carlson, who's been pretty solid when he's gotten an opportunity through much of his career, and Caden Davis, the undrafted free agent out of Ole Miss. And Davis was solid his last year at Ole Miss, and multiple field goals in his college career from 55 plus yards. So he's got a big leg. One of these 3 guys ought to be a good kicker. I mean, if the Jets can't find one good kicker out of these 3 guys, I mean, I don't even know what we're doing here. Kicker is one of those spots like everybody panics about, but like 9 times out of 10, things end up being okay. And I get it, because Joe Douglas was awful at finding kickers. Joe Douglas was like the worst GM in the league. It's like the only GM in the league who couldn't find a kicker. But kickers really aren't as hard to find as the Jets make them out to be. And maybe this new regime will show us that, because like no other team like has issues the Jets have at kicker. So one of these guys is probably going to be fine, and the Jets will move forward, and like we'll forget about all this trepidation. And our last question, John, who is replacing the run-stopping production from JFM of the 2025 Jets? I feel like losing him last year caused many defensive struggles, and I don't see a piece on defense that fills JFM's old role. So that's a really good question. I agree. The loss of John Franklin Myers last year was a big one, and it really did not make a lot of sense why the Jets traded him. I mean, the Jets made the big deal. We're going all in, and then we're trading this valuable player for salary cap reasons. This guy who was really good in the locker room, guy who was maybe not homegrown in the strictest definition of the word because the Rams drafted him and then cut him, but a guy who really like developed his career with the Jets. It really did not sit well with me when the Jets traded him as late as they did, and really did not make a whole lot of football sense. It's a different scheme, though. I think the value from JFM is not necessarily that he was individually a great run defender. It was just more he fit the system where the Jets wanted to play really small and really fast in their back 7. So having like a defensive end who was 290 gave you extra bulk on the defensive line. Essentially another guy to eat space, to keep your linebackers clean from blocks, because when you're playing faster linebackers who are smaller, they're not going to be as good at shedding blocks. So that means you need your defensive lineman to absorb the blocks from offensive linemen. So when you have 3 guys who are like 290, 300 pounds, as the Jets did with JFM, it makes a difference. And they put Michael Clemens into that role, and it just did not work. Michael Clemens was fine as, a guy who took a handful of snaps when JFM needed a rest. But Michael Clemens in the starting role got really exposed. But it's a new scheme, and run defense is really a team effort. We always say, like, offensive line's only as good as its weakest link. The same goes with run defense. It makes sense because if it's true on one side of the ball, it's true on the other. You have to have every gap filled. Essentially, the way run defensive schemes work is every player is assigned a gap. And the gap's the space between two blockers. So it's the center and guard, or the guard and tackle and tight end, or tight end in the end of the line of scrimmage. Like everybody gets either one or two gaps. So everybody's got to play sound football. Last year, the Jets had big issues stopping the run, especially at the defensive tackle spot where they had Javon Kinlaw in there, who should never play a rundown in his life. And I mean, one of the baffling things of the offseason was the Washington Commanders apparently saw Javon Kinlaw's film last year with the Jets and decided that he needed double the pay. It made no sense. The Jets' issues last year were really based on the defensive line. They actually had two very good run-stopping linebackers in Jamie and Sherwood and Quincy Williams. Just they didn't get enough out of the defensive line. Hopefully Quinnen Williams improves his play this year. Again, Will McDonald, you're hoping that I'm hoping maybe like he bulks up and is better starter against the run. The return of Jermaine Johnson could help there because Jermaine Johnson was really the only good run-stopping defensive end the Jets had, and he got injured very early in the season, so he barely played for the Jets last year. But everybody's got to play. Everybody's got to do their job. I did not love the defensive tackles the Jets brought in, but hopefully they can step up. But there's not really one player when you're talking stopping the run. Typically, the days of like the 350-pound space eater in the middle of your line are pretty much gone because defenses these days want every defensive lineman to be able to get after the passer. So everybody's just got to do their. I don't think this role gets filled by one player. I just think like everybody's got to step up. And, hopefully you get better defensive line play stopping the run than you did a year ago. Anyway, that's all for today's episode. This has been the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day is our motto. As always, if you enjoy the show, hit the subscribe button where you're watching or listening so that you'll never miss an episode. If you enjoy the show and are listening on a podcast source, please give it a 5-star review. And if you're watching on YouTube and enjoy the show, give this episode a big thumbs up. It helps us out, helps other Jets fans find the podcast. Enjoy your Wednesday, everybody. We'll be back tomorrow to talk more Jets.